Welcome to the Love Thy Neighbor podcast on Anchor Radio. I'm your host, Anthony Wilson. You may say, well, what is Anchor? Well, Anchor is a one-stop shop for hosting and distributing your podcast. Anchor, best of all, is 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast, maybe go into radio, get your voice heard, go to anchor.fm/start and join me and a diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast. God bless you and happy February. This is February 1st. I'm your host, Anthony Wilson. You're listening to the Love Thy Neighbor podcast network. Hopefully you tuned in to the Gospel and Gaming with Pastor TC last night. Had a powerful discussion. Check out that podcast. We're looking forward to Transparent Tuesdays with Willie G. Berry. Been trying to get him on track and get him on here. We're looking forward to that. We have a powerful interview with a great communicator, the founder of Master Talk. Check him out on YouTube, Master Talk. His name is Brendan, humble but very successful man. And we're talking about the power of communication and how we can communicate our message, primarily for me in the Love Thy Neighbor network, the gospel message, and communicating it to the best of our ability. And so tune in and learn the ways of the Master Talk with Brendan and myself as we talk about communicating.
Hello, Anthony. How are you?
Hi, how's it going, man?
Life is good, brother. How about yourself?
Hey, pretty good. Just surviving this crazy new world we're living in.
Love it, man.
Oh man, thanks for joining me, man. I got a referral from a good friend of mine, Fatherhood Fridays, Chalmer Williams.
Of course.
Spoke very highly of you.
Yeah, Fatherhood Fridays.
Yeah, it's a good friend of mine. I've known him for about 15 years. So definitely good friend, good guy, good family guy. Really enjoyed what you did on his podcast. Awesome.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
So, Brendan, can you tell me just a little bit about yourself? Who you are or what you would want people to know about you. So a lot of times we just tell people our credentials, but what do you want people to know about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the most important thing is that I think Gary Vee explains this so well. Impact and legacy is the most important currency, in the sense that when we live our lives, when we try to achieve something, we should always tie that achievement in a way that services the societies that help us become the person we end up being. So for me, service and helping other people, and how that manifests is through public speaking YouTube videos in my case. But I think the key message is I'm a man of service. I like helping others, and it's something that's always been a part of my core being and who I am.
I think that is beautiful. I mean, my focus, as you were saying earlier, is through Jesus Christ, through the Bible. And a lot of times I'm out and I see a man who's sitting in front of a 7-Eleven or a convenience store who's down on their luck and who may be asking for change. And I want to communicate more to him than just that I pity him or that's a shame where he's at. I want to communicate to him that I actually care and that I care about him beyond this moment. And so I just don't want to give you change and just walk away, but I want to leave you with something more. And so like you were saying, just in those interactions, communication is not just what I do on this podcast or on a YouTube channel, but I've got to be a better communicator of what it is that I'm presenting even in an everyday life situation or circumstance, whether it be at the convenience store, the grocery store, or whatever interaction I have. Can you speak a little bit more to just being a better communicator in everyday life?
Absolutely. It's a great question. The way I've always seen this, Anthony, is the way that we communicate, every interaction we have is an opportunity for us to be better communicators. And I can give you a simple example. The relationships you have, whether they're personal, whether they're romantic, with your significant other, whether they're business related, all of the people that you already care about and that already care about you is a great first step to practicing relationship building. So for example, I could talk about the relationship with my mom. Like, we used to fight all the time because we had such big differences from a cultural perspective of where she came from, growing up in Sri Lanka to where I am, where I was born, which is Canada. Is a completely different culture, the way that we do things. So there was a lot of tension between us, especially in my early life, because we just couldn't get along. There were things that didn't make sense in what she was saying. There was things that I was saying that didn't make sense to her. And it was really hard to build a relationship and move past those differences. But then over time, as I improved my communication skills, what ended up happening is I was able to communicate in a way that made her feel a lot more comfortable. So I was a lot more calmer. I asked her more questions about why she believed what she believed. And I understood most of the time her perspective made a lot of sense. It just came from a different angle that I wasn't used to seeing. And then based on that, this idea of understanding rather than speaking for the sake of doing so enabled me to build a much better rapport with her. And I don't think we've had her fight in 5 years or something. I don't even remember. It's been so long because we're able to move past each other's differences. And I think the way that we implement this in this life, in this world that we live in, especially for those who are listening to this right now, is you need to take it upon yourself to lead those conversations, to be that leader to everyone around you and say, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I want to ask more questions. If you start to ask more questions, especially in the context of relationships, what's going to happen is that person will slowly open up to you and say, wow, this person really cares about understanding my perspective rather than simply replying to it. So when we get to that place, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's really, really, really good. I mean, as I'm listening to you, I think about, the Bible teaches that we are to be slow to speak, slow to be angry, but quick to hear. And that's what I hear you saying, is that I want to take my time, with answering this question or being upset about what a person is saying. And I want to take more time, I want to be quicker to listen to what they have to say, so that we can actually have a real dialogue and use the term understanding. I really like that because, for me, as a Christian, sometimes Christians are kind of seen as intolerant. I've been a person and I've tried to use my empathy for other people, to build common ground. Can you kind of talk to the role of empathy in building relationships a little bit?
Yeah, of course, I'm happy to. Empathy is the core to everything, as you probably know very well, Anthony. It's this idea that how can we put ourselves in the shoes of other people? And then through that perspective, start to see an angle that we didn't see before. And I'll give you a very easy example. When I started YouTube videos and making that for people, I was very insecure when I would speak to people who were much older than me, who had a lot more experience than me. So in order to cope with those insecurities, I would simply gloat about my accomplishments to show that I belonged in this room. And then one day, I was speaking to a 6-year-old girl who was in my workshops one day, and she came up to me and she asked me the best question that I was ever asked. And the best question I was ever asked is, what's a CEO? And I looked at her and I said, you're right, what is a CEO? Does that really matter that I mention all this stuff? And that's when I started to really reframe how I thought about communication, from getting these executives to to find me impressive, which didn't really matter at the end of the day, to saying, okay, how do I add value to the person I seek to serve, to the person who can't afford a communication coach? That's why I started this whole thing, and I should be aligned with that message. So by being empathetic to that 6-year-old and to every other person I want to speak to, I was able to mold and change my message in a way where most people go, wow, I want to be a part of this.
Now, I love what you just said, because what is overwhelming to me in this conversation is your humility. We started off this conversation by me asking you to tell a little bit about yourself, what you want people to know about you. Now, if you could, now that the listeners have kind of gotten to hear you and talk and listen to what you're saying, take just a few minutes and tell us really the things that you have accomplished, what your business is, some of the things that you've done, so they can see how this humble person that we were just talking to has done a lot in this world and has accomplished a lot of things. And so I'm gonna give you a little leeway just to brag just a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, I usually don't take too much space with that, but I'm happy to.
I know. It's uncomfortable, right?
Sure. I'm happy to take a couple of seconds. So I'm the founder of Master Talk, and it's a YouTube channel I started to help the world master the art of communication, public speaking. And yeah, when I started the channel, it was in my mother's basement with a phone, no budget, no lighting. I thought it was the stupidest idea ever. And then over time, it turned into a movement in some ways, where people from across the world come in and find those videos so that they can communicate their ideas better to the world. So yeah, it's been a blessing working with the incredible clients and talking to the incredible people who watch my videos every week. So it's been fun.
Awesome. And, definitely, when we're done this conversation, I'm going to encourage everybody to go check out, Master Talk, on YouTube and, the different outlets that he has, because being a better communicator, I think is the essence of us finding that happy medium. Just because, and I'm going to ask you to speak to this a little bit, just because we disagree doesn't mean that we have to be disconnected. And that's something that I say to, the people around me. I said, I can disagree with you without disconnecting from you, without rejecting you. Can you speak to a little bit about that? And is that something that's possible, that we can disagree but not have to disconnect?
That's powerful, brother. I love that. This idea of disconnection does not have to be the consequence of disagreement. It's so powerful. Yeah. I would say I completely agree with you, and I have to take a note on that and probably steal that. But I think the idea is very much the same. It's this idea that when you start thinking through disagreement, when you can get to a place in your communication skills where you don't get offended by disagreements, you're open to those discussions, and you're listening to the person you disagree with the most, I believe that is the trait of a world-class communicator. Someone who can take someone at the opposite end of the spectrum and say, I'm here to listen to you, I'm here to understand the pain and the suffering that you've been through, and I'm here to understand, not to respond, not to tell you that I'm right, but to empathize with your point of view, no matter how long it takes. And I think that is the secret to some of the best communicators on the planet. For example, if you take the U.S. elections as an analogy, it's such an idea that there's so much division in the way that we think about politics, when at the end of the day, and whether you live in the States or not, it's about also understanding the following, which is whether you're Democrat or Republican, you probably watch the same Netflix specials, you probably eat the same Big Mac, you probably go to the same parks. Sure, there might be differences, but are those differences that big? And when you start to ask yourself these types of questions, that's when you can start to approach conversations from an empathetic perspective rather than a defensive one.
Yeah, I think that's really good. It puts me in the mind of another saying, and it's something that I say a lot. but I want to be a bridge builder, not a bridge burner. And there's so many people who are bridge burners because they're not willing to take the time to listen to what the other person has to say and say, well, you know what? I don't agree with entirely with what you're saying, but I don't disagree entirely either. Here's where I can agree, and we can start to work from this point. Not just, I disagree, we're done, disconnect, I can't be around you, that kind of thing. Because like you said, we probably go to the same grocery stores. Some of our kids go to the same schools, or the same experiences that we both share that are not dissimilar from each other. And so I was thinking about, and again, I'm a Bible teacher. So one of my heroes in the Bible is the Apostle Paul. And there's this instance in the Bible where he goes to this town and these people are worshiping different gods. And the Apostle Paul doesn't ridicule them for worshiping different gods. He just sees that they have worship. And so he says, well, let me share with you the God that I worship. And I thought it was profound to see that in the Bible, that he built a bridge. He didn't go in burning bridges saying, you guys are horrible because of what you're believing, and I can't believe you believe it. No, he said, well, since you guys do believe something, can I share an idea with you? Now, that skill, do you believe that that's a good skill, to be able to see where you can build a bridge and how to build that bridge, rather than going and saying, I can't deal with these people, so you burn the bridge?
That's beautiful. I love it. It's this idea of the way that you influence others is by first understanding their perspective, not the other way around. If you start to show your perspective without first understanding theirs, one, it puts you at a disadvantage because you can't mold your message in a way that speaks to them. And two, it usually doesn't come off the right way. So what we need to start doing when we think to influence, when we think to make a change, or rather share an idea that matters to you, you need to first understand and internalize why that idea should matter to them first. And then when you get to that place, whether it's something more complicated like a movement or a non-profit or a YouTube channel, or even it's something more simpler or probably more complex, like a conversation with your significant other that you're trying to navigate, that then you're able to apply these techniques and make yourself a better communicator and improve your life.
Wow. This is really, really good. This is really good. I'm enjoying this conversation. Use the term ideas. A lot of what we see in our world was somebody's idea, and being able to communicate an idea. Can you kind of speak to how do you communicate ideas, especially when they're fresh, or a person's unfamiliar with what you're trying to express to them?
Absolutely. So the way that I communicate an idea, I'm happy to share that framework with people, is through a series of questions that I like to ask from the people I want that idea to be heard. So I'll give you the best example. Let's say I want to share a new research project, a new idea, a new nonprofit, a new company with a group of people. The first step is figuring out who are those group of people? Like, who are they? What are their belief systems? Where are they from? What do they care about? What do they need? Why is this idea important to them? So then we start to outline those people. Then that's the first part. Then the second part of the framework is to have dinner with that group. Understand them, talk to them, ask them questions like, if you were to explain my idea back to me, how would you explain it? If you were to change one thing about my idea, what would you change and why? And what are some techniques that you think I should use to make my idea sound better to you? And then through those conversations, I just like to use dinners because food, I find, connects people in a way that other mediums don't.
Yes.
It's just, or maybe I just like food too much. But anyways, the third part of that framework is now that we've had those conversations, we understand who our message is for, because our message can never be for everybody. The third part of that framework is saying, okay, let me test out different versions of those ideas on those groups of people to see if it resonates. And it won't resonate the first time. And then over time, you'll figure out how to mold your message. In the same way, when I started, I did all of that to a certain extent, actually, maybe not as well as I should have, where, you know, I gloated about my accomplishments and then I retested and I said, wait, this is not the right approach. And then same thing, right? When I used to do podcasts, when I started this and people would ask me the same questions you're asking me, Anthony, I used to explain this in a much more complicated way. This is the theory of this. I was like, wait a second, Brendan. Is Anthony even getting this? Like, is his audience actually going to take action? Right. So I made it a lot easier over time. So even I'm still reworking my ideas. I'm sure there's several parts in this very interview where I didn't show up in the best way and that I need to refine. I'm always improving my game. So that's what I recommend for people. So let me just summarize that. Find the group that you want to change, that you want to impact, even if it's one person. Have conversations with them, ideally over dinner. Understand them. There's no spreadsheet that's going to replace those insights. And then the third thing is try out the ideas you got from those conversations to see which ones actually stick and double down on those ideas and those techniques.
Awesome, Brendan. This is rich. this is really, really rich. You know, you said something about you know, growing and developing. Even in your presentation, with the last few minutes that we have, I want you to kind of just talk a little bit about developing yourself. Some people may think if I get to 1K on my subscribers, or if my podcast is getting to 5,000 downloads a day, that I've hit the pinnacle. But what it sounds like to me is that you're saying that you should always still be growing and developing, that you shouldn't feel like I've mastered this and then just lock it in, but you should be growing and developing. Is that correct?
Anthony. You know, my perspective on this is when we lose our sense of purpose, when we feel we've made it, that is when the problem starts. Because after you make it, what happens next? And a question I always like to ask people to really get them thinking, because much like Tony Robbins says that I always like bear repeating, the quality of your life is solely determined by the quality of the questions that you dare to ask yourself about life. When you ask questions like, if you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? That's when you start to get to the core of who you are and what you want to do as a human being during the time that we're here. Because in that journey, you realize, well, if I had $10 million in my bank account, would you still work? And if so, what would you do? What time would you wake up? Who would you hang out with? What country would you be in? Would you even live in the same house? It's these questions, Anthony, that allow us to find meaning in our lives. And to your point, if you're comfortable with where you are, and that is your end goal, and that is exactly how you'd spend your time every day, then I'm happy for you. But I don't think that's the case for most people. We're always trying to strive for a little bit more. We're always trying to look for that sense of purpose, whether it's through our families, whether it's through our achievements, or whether it's a combination of all of those things. So I'd encourage you to ask those questions for yourself to make sure that where you are is exactly where you want to be.
That's really good. And it leads me to maybe my final question is this, that when you begin to look back, and you kind of touched on this just briefly, you look back at your communication in the past, what is your mindset about making the changes that are necessary to move forward? Some people, they look back and they see mistakes and it tears them up. They almost makes them want to quit. Like, man, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Look at all the mistakes that I made. But it sounds like you have a different perspective of how to internalize and then use those mistakes moving forward. Could you speak to that just a little bit?
Anthony. You know, my perspective on this is fairly simple. Look at the people that you admire and see if they made any mistakes. And chances are, I don't know. You know, I'm not a mathematician, but my perspective, I think the stat I'd probably give is 100%. Right? Like, or maybe even 102%.
Yeah.
Maybe
Right,
So when you
right,
look at that,
right.
always say, what is the goal that you want? Because somebody else has already achieved that goal somewhere in the world. And then say, well, did they make mistakes along the way? Well, probably. So is it okay for you to make mistakes along the way? Probably. And then through that reflection, through the admiration that you already have for the people in your space, you'll start to understand that their way to success, if you really dig, was not linear. It was like a roller coaster, up and down, mounts and valleys and drifts, and then over time, they ended up getting to where they wanted to be. So that's what I would encourage people to start doing, is start really paying attention to what makes people successful actually successful. And then once we get there, we can realize that mistakes are just a byproduct of that. And trust me, I've made a bunch of them, and I still make a bunch of them today. I mean, once again, just so people understand, I started a YouTube channel on executive communication tips when I was 22. Who the hell am I to share this tip with people? Like, it just makes no sense. So if I could do it, I in some ways it could be, oh, he's too young. But the other side of the equation is saying, well, if he can do it and coach executives, why can't I? And that's how I want people to think about it.
Yeah, I think being okay with taking those mistakes and building on them and growing from them, and not locking yourself into those things, but saying, you know what, I might have been wrong about that. My first impression of that, I don't think I communicated that correctly, because I'm a person that's always trying to communicate my message better, refine it, and like you said earlier, get it across to people. And sometimes I do ask people, like, what are your issues with what I'm saying? What are some of the objections that you have to what I have to say? Because what it does is that it teaches me how to see things from their perspective. Because as a communicator of whatever that message is, you want that message to reach as many people as it can. Like you said, it may not reach everybody, but you don't want to be your own obstacle in reaching people, because you're too narrow and you're not willing to grow and develop in speaking that message. As I related, the Apostle Paul going to a place where they believe all different other things and saying, I'm going to bring my message here and at least give them a chance to hear it. And they're going to decide, if they will understand it. And as a matter of fact, the people that heard that in that particular passage, they listened to him and they said, hey, I want you to come back another day and we want to listen again. And I was like, wow, it was just mind blowing to see that in the Bible, this whole thing play out, because that's my goal, is that the time I spend, I would love for a person to say, hey, come back. I want to talk to you again. So last question, I promise. How do you get people to want you to come back and talk to them again?
And that's not something you'll get overnight, but definitely over time. And the way that we do this, Anthony, is by constantly applying the framework. If we understand who we want to speak to, if we have the right conversations, and we keep retesting our ideas, eventually everyone will be waiting in line to hear our ideas. That is the way I want people to think about this. If people aren't waiting in line, aren't coming back, aren't showing up, it's always because you didn't message the idea in a way where people say, this is about me. This is for me. I need to be a part of this movement. And if you're obsessed, if you're focused on making your goals and your ideas heard to the people that you seek to serve, I believe that you can achieve that outcome. So it's no surprise to me, Anthony, that people come back to your seminars, that people come back to your gatherings, because they believe in your message. You've done all of this. You know who you want to serve. You've had the right conversations, even after you've spoken. So that people always say, Anthony's the person I want to learn from. Anthony is the guide, the compass that I need to get me to that next phase of life.
Well, wow. This has been, just for lack of a better word, very enlightening, very illuminating. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit with me. I learned a lot, and I hope that my listeners learn a lot. about communication, because communication is the lifeblood of anything that we're going to do. We can't do it without properly being able to communicate. Is there anything that you would like to say before we sign off?
Yeah, of course.
To our
I'm
listeners,
happy to leave a book recommendation, which is a book for those of you who want to master communication and make a difference in the world. I highly recommend Thirst by Scott Harrison. I think Scott's a savant in public speaking and storytelling. He's also a man of faith. And what's great about Scott and what I respect about his work is that he's able to apply public speaking, all the frameworks, all of the lessons we learned in this show. He does it. And he's someone that I learned from. He's a personal hero of mine, and I encourage people to check out his book.
Well, thank you very much, Brendan. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on this podcast. Like I said, man, I wish you all the best in everything that you're doing. Hopefully you just keep growing and impacting the world around you. Thank you for coming on, man, and just enjoy 2021. I pray that it's better than 2020 was.
I pray the same for you, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You have a great day.
All the best.
God bless. All right. Bye-bye.